Hello and welcome to Upside, the podcast that looks behind the headlines that affect European venture. Today, Mads, Lomax, Andrew, myself, it is a full house. And what have we got on the docket? We are talking about Claudebot, Maltbot, what? We've got big tech earnings, they're out. We've got some private AI mega raises. I want to dig into some of those. We are looking at the United States of Europe. Could we, should we? That's one for you, Mads. And we're tooling up for a fight. This is your one, Andrew. We are looking at defense spend across Europe. We've got deals of the week and some other bits and pieces to throw in.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Now, to start with, I want to just share that I was in Saudi Arabia for the first time this week. Has anyone been to Saudi?
Yep.
I'd not been before, and it's really hard to not take with you all of the Western media stereotypes that you hear and all of the Middle East region noise that we see across the news cycle. And I was absolutely blown away at how friendly and fun the people were. I really enjoyed Riyadh. It's a really interesting city. It's like a Dubai-ish kind of vibe, all building sites, so much going on. And then I was at the Super Return LPGP conference, speaking with loads of different characters and hearing all of the inside stuff that you don't hear about in the news. And NEOM is changing a lot. So NEOM, which is this big kind of project around, we've all heard of the line. Did you go and see anything, Mads, while you were there? Did you see any of the projects? I didn't get a chance. So we've got the line, we've got the Oxygen, we've got Trojena and Sindalar, I think it's called, which is the luxury island. Most people have heard of the line, which was that crazy long built silver literal line in the desert. That's been super scaled back. So they're really pulling back on all of these mega projects. So yet to see how they're going to come to pass. And the other thing that I just wanted to raise was Vision 2030, which I wanted to talk about with you guys. I love the fact they've got this kind of strategic guiding light. Now, Vision 2030 is MBS's way of kind of corralling all of the energy in the population and across the investors and all of the startups and everything to focus on how they describe it is they're turning Saudi Arabia into a diversified investment-driven economy that can employ its own citizens. And I think it's really lovely to have a kind of a guiding light context. And I was wondering what we should have for Europe. Any ideas as to what we should have as the guiding light for us?
Make Europe great again. Mega.
Mukka, make UK great again. But it just felt like, because they all have this kind of guiding reason to do business, invest, build, start up, do their stuff. I think we need something. I don't know what it is.
That's an example of a centrally run regime, no? I mean, it's very different.
But we can still have, I'm not sure.
But it'll get ripped off every couple of years.
The problem in Europe is that, I mean, even in the individual countries, we don't really have strategic guiding lights, do we? I mean, look at the UK's meandering at the moment, let alone
we've got
Europe.
the 8 industrial strategies, right? Not that we should use those.
There's no coherent mission for the country, though, is there?
No, there isn't. I mean, I remember the 2012 Olympics was quite a galvanizing force. Obviously, wars. Did you see who's the political? Was it Ed Day? Who's the guy that runs? What's the third political party called?
Yeah, Ed Davey runs the Lib Democrat.
The Dems. I forgot what they were called. Jill, I saw that he made a call for war bonds this week. Did you see that?
Yes.
So I kind of get the principle that this is like
that's a rebrand for your fundraise, isn't it? A war bond.
A war bond.
I also saw that NEOM, by the way, back on Saudi has because they were hosting the Asian Winter Games in Saudi Arabia in 2029, which is crazy. Like, the skiing, the biathlon, all that stuff, but it's just been postponed.
Has it? They're doing the World Cup in 2034, I think.
Football,
I'm not a footy
but not
fan,
the freaking
so
Winter Games. Yes, they are.
But they're doing. They've opened up. Obviously, they have the comedy festival. They've opened up the whole music scene. I who knows what to not believe, whatever. But it was just a really energizing trip. and a very surprising trip. I didn't expect to. I don't know what I expected. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to go back. To be fair.
How much money did you close?
Well, yeah, to be seen. What most regions want, and Saudi is no different. They want circular capital. They want foreign investors to come in and help build their ecosystem, which I totally understand. It was the same in Dubai when we spent time there. But they are also looking to, there are lots of Saudi families looking to invest in Europe. So there were some lovely conversations to be had, should I say, Lomax. Right. Anyway, enough of my stuff.
Well, I've just a left field one there on the vision and mission for a country and the guiding light. So, we know what happens with startups when they grow up and eventually the founders leave and professional management takes over and they're IPO'd and they're run by boards and it all becomes a little bit stale. And I wonder, is there an analogy with democracies? When you have these elected governance structures, they're good at steady as she goes and just, continuing the status quo. But actually, if you look at the really dynamic, places, the United States was very dynamic, right? It was the founding fathers and it was kind of all, going crazy. But then after a while, once the founders, they leave, is that when things get tired and it's just more steady as she goes? And actually, our model just isn't that well suited for, setting out a vision and going after it because 4-year election cycles and all that stuff.
I just think we're really bad when we're not at war. So I think we need something that galvanizes the human spirit. And when everything's really nice and obviously in Western countries quite peaceful up until recently, it just feels like we kind of just fall off it all just gets a bit like BAU. And I hate the thought of it, but it feels like it's only when we're under pressure and the conflict that actually things kind of come together. But maybe we'll see.
I don't know, Dan. I mean, you look at the the peace dividends. You look at the economic growth that both the Western world has seen since the end of the Cold War. Then I think that kind of goes against what you're saying there.
Fair. And obviously America has, with the American dream and their capitalism and their rah-rah and their sales and their push, they've done okay. But at what cost? I mean,
no, but
society doesn't really function over there.
It did feel like that, this shock treatment that Europe is getting is definitely being good for it, which we're going to come on to later today, I guess. But
yeah, we are. Well, let's get into it. But we are going to talk a lot about Europe's renewal. But let's start with a bit of AI corner stuff. Has anybody here played with Claude Bot, now rebranded as Maltbot? Has anyone played with it?
Yep. Of course, Matt.
I haven't, mainly through fear. I didn't have a separate machine, so mainly through fear about in time not setting up a virtual machine, but just to set up. So Claude Bot, now Maltbot, a device built by Peter Steinberger, which I'd probably categorize as a personal intern. It's an agent on steroids, very, very smart, a bit of a game, I think a bit of a kind of an example game-changing agent, personal agent. And I think this is what Siri should have been. Now, incidentally, I think we're going to see the new Siri in February. I know I'm a big Apple fanboy and I keep bringing it up, but I think this is what Siri could be. But Mads, tee up a bit better than I just did what Maltbot is.
So Peter Steinberger, he's an Austrian dev who built kind of some software and he sold it. And then he sort of said, look, I felt empty after cashing out. And, I don't like to sit around and just read. I would like to build stuff. So he's built this Maltbot here as a hobby. And it's an open source AI agent with full control of your system. So it can control the mouse, the keyboard, your data. And also connects to all kinds of services like your messaging and your WhatsApp. And then you can set it loose and you can ask it to do stuff. You can ask it to check in on things. You can ask it to go and find stuff for you. You can ask it to send messages. It can do all kinds of stuff.
I saw a guy, did you see this, Mads? I saw a guy who negotiated a new car deal. Or the bot, the agent negotiated the new car deal. Did you read about that?
There are all kinds of good stories coming out. I must say, it scares me a little bit giving it that much agency. And so, no, I have not asked it to make any investments on our behalf just yet.
I saw the guy also did there was a guy who when it was Claudebot. They changed name because Anthropic gave a cease and desist, so they changed it from Claudebot, it's a lobster logo, so it's Claw, CLAW. It was a play on the word and the logo. It's not Claude as in Anthropic's Claude. So they changed it to Maltbot, and there was a guy who uploaded all of his health data and access to Tesco, his shopping basket, and it built and bought. So it built a recipe for his body, for his health, went to Tesco, filled the basket, bought the stuff, and the stuff all got delivered automatically. So there are all these like little lovely stories of the guy negotiating for a new car. He got $4,500 off so it negotiated with all of these dealers in his local region automatically and got him a $4,500 discount ultimately. The Tesco one, there was another one, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it's a very interesting moment in time, Mads.
100%. And it's sort of, it heralds what's ahead for us. I think it's still a little scary because, today we have agents and we use agents, right? And I use agents a lot, and, we use Claude Code and we set it up and we do stuff. But there's still a relative level of control in terms of what you do, and there's a defined scope. Whereas this is sort of more of an unconstrained scope. It is think about how to do stuff and then go out and figure out how to do it. You have access to my email, my WhatsApp. You can send messages to people. You can do all kinds of stuff that really, as you can imagine, could end up quite badly if you're not careful. You can power it by multiple different models. I mean, clearly, Peter Steinberger, the developer, he is a very sharp dev because the way he set it up is just really, really elegant. Right, so you don't have to connect it to Anthropic. You can connect it to other LLMs if you want. I mean, it's just there's so much flexibility built into the system, which is what makes it really easy to connect to all kinds of services around you that you might be using for stuff. What people have rushed to do is to rush out and buy their own sort of separate systems to install Claudebot, just so that Claudebot doesn't take it upon itself to completely reorganize your important data to the point where
he's commercializing this, Mads.
I don't know
it's
if he's
open source.
commercializing it. I think he's just opened it up. I mean, I wouldn't connect my bank account to it, but I would give it like limited access to things or load up, I don't know, some kind of limited payment card to things and give it a proper go. But I don't think, Mads, it's going to get beyond the geeks. I think this is just for geeks, and I think this is just going to show what's possible.
I think you're right. I think it's too dangerous today, and with that, I don't mean that that tech is tech, right? But it's so powerful.
It literally thinks for itself. It will query things. It's got, what was it called? What's the token called where it can wake up every 10 minutes and do stuff on its own? The moonlight process or something where it can just go off. It just wakes up and goes, oh, I can see in your inbox, such and such an email has come in. I'm going to go off and action that, and it can just do all these things on its own.
So where did you set it up, Mads? Not on your actual computer, no?
Well, you can download it to your machine, or if you were a little more careful, you could buy another machine and download it there. But it just needs a kind of your Mac and off you go.
It can go on a Raspberry Pi. It can go on anything. I mean, loads of people are buying Mac Minis and just loading them up like a little independent device, and then off it goes. But you can run a virtual machine. You put it on a Raspberry Pi, put it on anything. I'm gonna have a play. I'm gonna be bold this week and have a play. More on AI. So
founders, if you get kind of unsolicited term sheets from an
email.
analyst called Claudebot, just be careful, right? It may not be.
I do worry. Like, imagine getting a spam email or something, a junk email, and then it wakes up and actions something. And I also saw that somebody had their Amazon account hacked. So there was some kind of access, there was some kind of open something where somebody's Amazon, he was trying to, I think it was, building some of his kids' bedrooms, and somebody got access to his Amazon account and started buying stuff that wasn't part of the Malt bot. So we got some more AI raises this week. We had SoftBank investing into OpenAI. We have Anthropic raising. I saw that Tesla invested into XAI, which is another nice little circular deal. Well done, Elon. That was against, I remember this happening last year, it was against shareholder wishes. We've also got some tech earnings reports. We will come on to those in a second. But I tell you what, Lomax, just to tee off, SoftBank, OpenAI, what's happening there?
So OpenAI has obviously already raised like famous amounts of money. I think they've raised 64 billion already. Now looking to raise 160, I think is the number. Sorry, looking to raise 100 now, 100 billion in a new round. SoftBank have already gone big on OpenAI. Masayoshi Son, aka Masa, at SoftBank is known for his big swings, and this is no exception.
Does he have the money? Has he got the money? Because I remember there was a
Well, the money
challenge
at
as to whether
SoftBank,
SoftBank.
historically his massive bet was 20 million into Alibaba, which became 130 billion. He's had a couple of whiffs with WeWork, and he sort of infamously sold Nvidia way earlier than he should have done, which I think, as of today's date, would have been worth 150 billion on a relatively small position. But SoftBank still are now doubling, tripling down onto OpenAI. They own 11% of the company now, and are looking to invest. What is it now? Another
20 bill, isn't it?
How much so?
I think it's another 20 bill.
Another 20 bill on top of the 41 billion they've already put into the company. So it's Massa again going big.
Interesting, and it's very counter to the current zeitgeist, right? Everyone's looking elsewhere rather than OpenAI.
Well, people are looking at Anthropic. If you look at OpenAI now, they're doing, as reported, 20 billion ARR. So the growth rate actually from the last 12 months is only 2.5x growth rate. I know these numbers are very, very big.
I was going to say.
I know these numbers are very, very big.
All right, what's happening at Anthropic, Mads?
So they were in talks to do a $10 billion funding round. That's now been doubled to $20 billion due to oversubscription. Everybody wants into this hottest of hot AI companies. And it's a steal, a bargain. Just half the valuation of OpenAI, 350 headline. Revenue doubled to 10 billion, but doubled in the last 6 months. So growth rates are certainly higher than OpenAI's right now. A key difference to OpenAI is that the Anthropic team expects to break even by 2028. So before OpenAI, whereas Sam Altman over at the OpenAI team, he's basically said, we're going to keep investing and doubling down again and again and again.
They're going to burn, 14 billion this year, OpenAI, I think, is the projection.
Wow.
And Anthropic, on the other hand, could be headed towards an IPO, right? That's the rumor. So it's exciting. It's great to see the competition. The big news over at OpenAI is that the ads are coming. It's what we've been waiting for. I've been talking about for a long time, and it is a game changer.
But won't they just move? Well, I now use Claude more than I use ChatGPT because it's such a commodity. You just move, right? If it's an uncomfortable experience, why would you stay?
Ads don't necessarily have to be an uncomfortable experience. I think that's the experience we have from Google, right? There's been lots of ads and people have been using it.
Also getting to the point where there's a sunk cost in buying into a platform, right? As you start to integrate things into your workflows, be it Claude, be it OpenAI, as it learns what you like, what you don't like, as you learn its quirks, this begins to be a sunk cost in switching systems.
I don't know with this though, Andrew. I think it's such a commodity and it learns and picks up so quickly. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm talking as a consumer.
And they all make the same. They all still make mistakes, so they're all as bad.
Oh, there we go. There's my boy. There he is. Mads, what else is happening on the ASML? What's happening with agent swarms? What's all this about?
So while our friends in the States have been busy slinging around the billions, there's some really cool AI news that have come out of China. So Moonshot, the Chinese AI lab that blew away benchmarks with their Kimi K2 model last summer, they've released an upgrade, and it's the 2.5, K2.5, the swarm model. And what is that? Well, historically, reasoning models, they've been built to reason on a sequential basis. Okay, so that means that they're trained to break tasks down step by step and execute them as they go. And this means that if you try to have many agents attack one problem, then they step on each other's toes. They don't know how to collaborate. And so what Moonshot has done is they've now released a model that is purpose-built to coordinate up to 100 parallel subagents. Okay, so a whole swarm. Basically, by rewarding the model for executing things in parallel, they managed to train it to the point where you could do that. And it's done beautifully. But they've sort of released a simple demo, which is, let's say, want to find, top 3 YouTube creators across 100 niche domains, and then you spawn 100 sub-agents, and they all go out and they figure out how to coordinate that between them. And then you have an orchestrator that sits in the back to make sure that everything is then brought together. So it's mega cool, and it's also ahead of where the US labs are right now when it comes to swarm orchestration. So it's definitely a step forward.
Could I call this like another efficiency play? Is this another way of getting more for less with models or some kind of smarter approach, which is, I don't know, some kind of more efficient way of using it. Is that fair?
That depends on your definition of efficiency. In most domains, it's more efficient to work sequentially, but it just takes longer, right? And so, if one person can do something in 10 days, having 10 people work side by side doesn't necessarily bring it down to 1 day, because there's an issue of coordination, there might be duplication. So sequential is sometimes more efficient, but it's also slower. It's always slower. And so what this is about is, how can I get 100 things spun up at the same time to complete the task more quickly? It might take more resource, but sometimes speed is of the essence. And so I think what this is about is actually, look, we know that the consumption of tokens is just going to go up, 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 and the cost of tokens is going to go down, down, down. So this is a way to throw many more tokens at solving a problem. And of course, the more work we can do in parallel, the bigger challenges we can take on, the bigger problems we can solve across all domains, whether that's writing new computer code, doing new scientific research, solving things in medicine, whatever it is. So it's just a really, really cool thing.
Okay. One of my many conspiracy theories is that China is going to be super good at throwing in any kind of tool, LLM function that is going to mess with the massive growth in the American public markets with AI and tech. So if they can just remind the world, we got an open source version that does this, smarter, brighter, better, different. Don't worry, we got an open source version that does it. And it feels like this might be part of that pie. Anyway, tech earnings season. We got ASML, we got Meta, we got Microsoft, we got Tesla. I guess the main question for the room is, where are the learnings? What any inside tracks, any takeaways from the big tech earnings calls this week? Mads, ASML first, maybe?
So they had a fantastic quarter. Q4 bookings, 13.2 billion. It was a record order book. Chip makers are clearly pumping money into CapEx. And it's a clear sign that nobody's giving up on the AI build out just yet. In 2025, people were saying, is this going to continue? And, NVIDIA's order book was full, sold out all of 2026. Well, they're still buying CapEx, right? So the TSMCs of this world are still spending a lot of money on new lithography machines from ASML, meaning that if you look sort of into the future, there is an expectation from the people that have these CapEx bills that they'll keep being business. And they buy to orders. So there's a clear sign that the build out has legs well into 2027. Another interesting thing here is that China revenue is still as high as about 20% of the ASML revenue. And that's although the Chinese customers can't buy the highest ended equipment, they're buying stuff, both, older equipment, things to service, et cetera. So 20% of all of ASML. There's a big market there. And we could talk about some of the other companies, but in case anybody else has comments.
Well, first of all, I think it's great when we talk about big tech earnings seasons to be actually talking about a European company for once, right?
It is the only one, Lomax, to be fair.
It's the most important company in Europe.
I wanted to start strong, but it is the only one.
We are going to there's a couple of other observations to go alongside Mads's point. So one is, for the first time, orders from memory chip customers surpassed logic customers. So this is the first time that that's happened. So it's a direct result of basically the desperate need for high bandwidth memory. So AI models are getting so large.
But RAM's still kind of really problematic, though, isn't it? As part of the supply chain.
Yeah, and so memory chip makers are now having a real moment, right? Because this has become the big three memory makers, SK Hynix, Micron, and Samsung, are basically sold out through to the end of 2026 now. So that's definitely something that's going on in the background. Interestingly, also, ASML announced big job cuts. So they're cutting 1,700 jobs in kind of the white collar kind of head office bureaucratic roles, and they're actually hiring a similar number of engineers. So that's good, a bit of European cut the bureaucrats and bring in the engineers.
Boom.
Is
everyone else is doing the opposite. Everyone else is letting engineers go. I saw Amazon.
No, but I mean, yes, of course. But these are engineers who are building these very, very specialist machines, right? They're probably working on their product roadmap, right, for machines in the future. It's a sign that they need to actually invest for what's coming next down the line, which I guess is a good sign. They're still persisting with relatively punchy share buybacks. They announced a $12 billion share buyback. I mean, I'd prefer to see them investing, in R&D, but
why are they doing that?
Well,
do you know?
I don't know why. I mean, well, keep the shareholders happy, I guess. But
Sure, but aren't they? Isn't there more to be done? Anyway, okay. Who else?
Well, think back to what happened last year, right? How do you spend your cash? Well, you can M&A, you can buy stuff with M&A, you can invest in things, and they were investing in Mistral. They put money into that company and had a hiding, shareholders were telling them off, and we want share buybacks instead.
But they put 1 billion into Mistral, right? They just did a 12 billion buyback. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like
100%. And wouldn't you much rather have seen them put 12 billion into investing in things that would grow the economy?
Well, yeah, into their own next future generation of products and into
100%.
other things, and to the ecosystem, into their supply
But
chain.
that tells you something about whether management is culpable or whether it's shareholders that are just lacking vision and ambition. But something's not right.
Bit of fear, maybe. Meta, what's happening at Meta, Mads?
Well, just juxtaposing the two companies, there's a Meta and Microsoft. So both of them are plowing money like crazy into CapEx, into AI data centers. Both of them were great on revenue. So Meta, they were up 24% year on year, nearly 60 billion in revenue. The stock guidance is up. Everything was great. They're not selling models, but everybody is super happy to see them put more money into AI, because the story is basically, look, we're going to use the AI and we're using the AI to make our ad business better, and it's really working, and we're making money like bandits. Microsoft, on the other hand, are also making money, but Azure growth has decelerated while CapEx, the spend on CapEx is accelerating. And so the street was worried and saying, listen, you're spending more on CapEx, but your revenue growth is going down. That's the wrong correlation between the two. And therefore, the Microsoft share was sent down by 7%, despite beating earnings forecasts. So a tale of two cities there.
And Tesla, I mean, I think I remember reading this is the first year that Tesla didn't make a profit. Is that right, Mads?
So they've been loss-making before, but it's the first time they've had revenue decline. So the revenue declined because they've lost a lot of share. BYD has overtaken Tesla as the world's largest EV seller now. But even so, the stock was up. And Musk, he's totally reframed what's happening here. He's saying, you don't worry about the cars. We're no longer a car company.
We're pivoting, right?
We are a physical AI company.
Is that what he's saying?
That is what he's saying.
Okay,
Boom.
we'll invest. There we go.
Yeah.
It feels like this is going to be styled out as a pivot into whatever, Optimus Primes or something.
Well, into robo taxis and into Optimus program, right? If I was Tesla, I would be doing this. No, this is the smart thing to do.
I 100% agree, and I think the robo taxis. I think people underestimate how big this is going to be, because if you look around the world, yes, Waymo is clearly ahead. They're launching in London this year, but they're ahead in terms of the rollout of the cars and the safety record, and they've got great performance on the streets today. Tesla still hasn't cracked driverless to the level Waymo has, but their tech platform is much, much cheaper, and everybody is betting on, or at least all investors are betting on, the moment they crack it, they're going to become unstoppable because they have a much cheaper platform. It's a fraction of the cost of Waymo's platform, and they have so much data from having so many more cars on the roads. So the combination of a different technology architecture that's cheaper to make, and all the data they've been accumulating, gives them a great position as soon as they crack the last element. Now, can they do it? Listen, people have lost a lot of money betting against Musk, so I think it's not a stupid bet.
Just on the comparison between Meta and Microsoft, I always find it a bit arbitrary, really, because of course they're both one of these big companies, but over 80% of Microsoft's money comes from business and enterprise. Consumer is a side dish, whereas Meta is the inverse of that, with a tiny percentage of, perhaps that coming from VR, 1-2% perhaps, despite all the money they spent and the cool tech. But everything else it's an ad business. And so I think, it's macro trends are interesting, but that's where the comparison stops for me. The other interesting news with Meta, of course, is that they're rolling out this premium service in the UK because of the constraints on data protection. And that's going to dent their profits, because I think the price point's at $2.99, $3.99 on iOS and Android. But that's considerably lower than the ARPU, the average revenue per user they'll be getting for a user in the UK for ads across the board, probably down at 25% of the the ARPU they'd expect. So they're going to be taking a hit on for the premium users in order to continue to serve them. And I suspect most users won't pay, the $8, $9 that they're probably making per user from
Matt,
active
do you know
users for the
what
platform.
Meta's core revenue source is? Is it Instagram, or do you know which actual product that's the hot one?
I don't. I'm not sure of the split, but Insta is certainly up there. I mean, it's and surprisingly, Facebook, the legacy platform, I don't know who still uses it, but apparently
Old
many
people.
people do.
Old people like us use. I mean, I've deleted all these accounts in 2014. I haven't used any of them forever, but it's old people. My mum's on it.
But best guess is that it's Instagram and Facebook, probably between the two. I should think they're probably
I'm
evenly split.
intrigued. I'm gonna have a look. And I shouldn't have ended on a bummer. We've got Klarna. We've seen down on 30%. I should have stuck this at the front so we could have swept it under the carpet. Klarna's down 30%. What's happening here, Matt?
There's a spike in credit loss provisions. Kind of a fear that maybe some of the credit that's been given isn't as good as people thought. 30% is obviously a whopper.
Surprise!
Yeah, look. Nothing to see
Yeah.
here. It's
Yeah, okay. I mean, I also do wonder how any of these Euro unsuccessful stories are going to hit, hopefully, a slight push and wave of IPOs, but I'm sure we'll just ignore that one. Nothing to see here. Right, big one, big topic. Loads of things happening this week about Europe and Europe in a changing world. We've talked about the Makosa deal. This week or last week, maybe, we saw the EU-India trade deal. We are looking at stories of a federated Europe, the new United States of Europe. We've got Starmer in China, schmoozing away. Obviously, Carney, I love that Mark Carney talk. I'm still kind of thinking about him, and I see him all over the news cycle still. I think it's just great. Obviously, with Trump having swipes every now and then, it brings him back into the news.
He'd be touched to hear that.
Well, of course he would. I mean, he
happy.
is on the hotline. We speak often and regularly. But I love the fact that he's just in a very decent, human way, rather than Scott Bessent being incredibly unpleasant, or Lutnick being just like incredibly offensive and abrasive, and Trump doing what Trump does. Mark Carney just stood out and very calmly and lovingly and generously just spelled it all out. And I thought it was just such a wonderful statesperson. Oh, boom. Anyway, let's get back to Europe. Matt, why don't we kick off with this story about the EU integration piece? So this is a Telegraph story on the United States of Europe. What's going on here?
maybe the sender of the article, or the author of the article, or the place it was published is a bit of a giveaway. So
Yes.
the Telegraph, they've been warning about the United States of Europe for decades, of course, and they had another article about it recently. And it was sort of written, I don't know whether it's sort of intended to be a, look, this is really happening now, or be careful it's happening, or it really should happen, or whatever. It was not easy to necessarily figure out. But the way it was positioned was, look, there are so many things in terms of the enlargement, in terms of added spending, and initiatives that are being taken to try and make Europe stronger and more self-reliant. When you unpack what's actually happening under the surface, so it is said that there are 9 nations that are queuing up to join the Union, but in reality, only 2 are really moving forward with any kind of urgency, and many are in the application queue, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon. So I don't really see the speed there. In terms of moving from unanimity to majority rule, there's been an attempt to try and do that, for example, around freezing of Russian assets, kind of the 210 billion euros of Russian assets, where a kind of a workaround was done using Article 122, which is not really meant to be used for this sort of thing, but a way was found to freeze the assets, even though Hungary wasn't keen. They're obviously famously in the Putin fan club. Look, I don't think we are really meaningfully closer to a United States of Europe yet, despite what the Telegraph is trying to tell us. We can unpack some of that more by looking at what's happening with some of the trade deals, what's happening with the UK, Starmer's been in China, and then some of the other aspects of, I think you were mentioning, war bonds and other bits. But yeah, I'm not expecting sort of a new European anthem to roll around next quarter.
Well, okay.
It's just an attempt by the Telegraph to sort of stir and annoy the readership, isn't it? I mean, most of the readership of the Telegraph would be horrified to hear about the United States of Europe,
yeah,
or
that's the
happy that
point,
we're
isn't
not
it?
in it. But I'm with you, Mads. I mean, we can't even get the basics right, let alone go further down the road. And United States of Europe, when we can't get a unified tax policy, we haven't managed to push the EU Inc. through yet. The European wide digital economy is still inconsistent and essentially more a pipe dream than it is a reality. So that's meant to make it easy to sell digitally across borders. So I mean, until some of the fundamentals are fixed, it's going to remain really difficult to do anything on the big ticket items, which feeds, of course, into our next topic about the European military.
It's also going to be really difficult that everyone sits here and around the table, including us, and just has this attitude, because if ever there was a moment, the UK is now out of Europe, right? But like, if ever there was a moment for Europe to like galvanize itself and get on with it, like now is the time, right? I mean, or does it need like one step worse? Does it need like
It needs one step worse, and I feel like Trump has sort of pushed us to open Pandora's box, but we've not climbed inside yet. And it's almost as if Trump's policies keep us one step before kind of crisis point where we'd really have to make some painful decisions and actually just get on with it.
Yeah,
and we're sort of teetering around the edge, aren't we? About these policies.
The ultimate crisis would probably be a hot war then. Basically,
and we may yet see.
There we go. See, we do need conflict. Lomax, you've got some notes on this, haven't you?
No, I'm just saying that, like, ultimately, maybe that is what the EU at the moment has got itself to a position where it has achieved many things since its inception. It has, in a way, kind of just been probably the original mission has crept and kept creeping where it needs to the point where it needs an actual formal reset now, which may be to kind of double, triple down on it and say, well, if we're going to do this bloody thing, let's do it properly, right? Which is actually, and United States of Europe is a branding thing. You can brand it as something different, but ultimately, like, maybe there is, like, the conclusion is this actually only works where you do adopt a more United States of America type model, right? And this is, in a way, what Draghi was saying with his report. It's actually, we do need to integrate much more tightly. And actually there is a big upside here, which is this is the biggest, one of the biggest like free trade unions in the whole world, right? The combined GDP is a superpower. But maybe you need to have that attitude and people need to just get on with it.
Yeah.
I mean, Europe is extraordinary. Let's not forget. I mean, it's unknown in the history of the world that for countries to work together and to create that union that has been created. So it's very easy to bash, to look at all the negative, as it always is, but it's an extraordinary achievement over the last 50 years to have created the European. Well, no, I'm just
look at you.
calling it as it is. It is extraordinary.
And if you manage to also,
and it has prevented, it has largely prevented any certainly cross-continental war within European countries, which was partly the
and if you do layer in,
War.
Initiatives like a capital union, right? Like where you actually fuse capital markets. Like there's Europeans historically, unlike Americans, are savers, which is both good and bad. But like, if you actually can consolidate and liberate that and allocate it wisely rather than like chasing, for example, US equities out of that, there is a huge opportunity. But
I think the disconnect on the you said the right word, Lomax, I think, which is branding. And the United States of Europe is, as far as I can see it, only ever going to be branding. I mean, it's an aspiration, but the problems you see within Europe when it comes to policy making are rooted culturally quite often. And I've always felt very strongly that Europe is best configured and best at economic ties. And you have to accept that the history is not, the US has a shared history, and even it has problems between its states, and they have a far more coherent history than Europe does between the different countries. So I think it's a bit of a pipe dream that a United States of Europe in any form that resembles the United States of America would ever work or ever become to fruition. But I think we can keep pushing economic ties together.
There isn't actually an irony in this, by the way, which is this is a historical reference, was that the states of America could not have like combined, and if they suddenly tried to do it now, it would be a very, very awkward thing to do, right? In the same way that suddenly the European states try to
It
combined
wasn't
up.
easy in the first place, Lomax.
No, but ultimately what galvanized them was the British, the common enemy, right? So
Yeah,
it's kind
back
of
to
a
war.
complete role reversal now.
There is a sort of an age-old tension between in the integration, whether you go broad or whether you go deep. And you go back 25 years, there was this huge discussion about kind of this big bang eastward enlargement. Right? Should we bring in all these new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe into the Union? And people on both sides of the debate had strong arguments for and against. In the UK, there was a view that actually we should accelerate that integration eastward, because it'll mean two things. It'll broaden up kind of the market, more market access. That'll be good economically, but it'll also make it much harder to go deep on integration, so we can avoid this United States of Europe. And of course, one of the implications of that was that we then had the kind of very high level of immigration into the UK that ultimately was one of the triggering factors for Brexit. So it sort of came back to bite us at the time. Whereas on the other hand, there were people saying, listen, we shouldn't expand so quickly. We should take it more slowly, and we should go deeper on the integration to move closer to a federal model. I think, like you, Lomax, I mean, if we can find ways to combine a capital markets union and other things, it could unlock so much for us. But without a crisis to drive it, it's hard to say what will get us there. Think about some of the things that enabled the federalization of the U.S. I mean, as you said, it was the common enemy that was Britain, but it was also kind of all the losses of the war bonds that were raised by the U.S. states, and where Hamilton, he sort of pushed for, look, we'll federalize the debt, and in exchange, we'll create a Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. and we'll federalize a lot of these economic policies because we'll take on the debt the individual states were forced to take on when they fought the British, right? So there was that swap, and is it that kind of crisis that will lead to similar integration here? And it probably is. And I think you're right, Andrew. We probably haven't seen something that's at quite the level yet. It has to be for us to take that next step.
Humans are
I mean,
funny things,
you can't escape the heritage, and really, it was a Franco-German project designed to stop them tearing each other apart and to stop Germany becoming the only rich country in Europe after the war. That's the truth of it. And there were only very few voices back then who ever were harping on about a sort of United States of Europe. And I think
I'm pretty sure Churchill was one of them.
Well, there's a big debate, isn't there, about whether he just viewed it as Europe should go and do this, or whether the UK should ever be involved. But
no, I'm pretty sure he thought Europe should just go and do this, and the UK
right.
shouldn't be involved. But let's not forget, I mean, he's the child of Britain that was, the most powerful country in the world that had a massive empire, and that's not exactly where we are today.
Yeah, so then you overlay sort of the kind of Benelux plumbing, but there was never early talk or planning long term for a European army or even a unified tax system, a centralized sort of treasury with any significant power. And that shared political identity was always a sort of botched, wasn't it? It was never really manifested in a sensible way at the beginning. So I don't think that's going to happen. But I would love to see Europe work better. But to Lomax's point, that probably needs some hard questions about where are we going and changing what's already been put in place. And as we know, that's extremely difficult.
Does anyone think Starmer's going to come back with anything useful or relevant from China?
Well, other than being able to go there on holiday with no visa.
Is the bar that low, Andrew? Is that where we're starting?
Dan, I mean, a couple of the other news pieces was we had the EU doing the Mercosur trade deal recently, and then the India trade deal this week. And I think it's instructive. We were talking about the EU as an economic superpower, to see that, yes, it took a long time to get this deal in place, but it's not a bad deal. You have car tariffs down to 10%.
Which one is this, Mads? Is this the India one? Is this the
EU-India? Is the India deal much better than what the UK got, just showing that market gravity beats negotiating speed. There was this fantasy that the UK could get better trade deals outside of the EU, and that is, of course, a pure fantasy. You can compare that to some of the other countries that are also sort of smaller countries trying to go it alone. Switzerland on one, but they have in reality, more than 120 bilateral agreements with the EU that are bound by a guillotine clause, which means that if Switzerland terminates one, they will all be cut. And it means that Switzerland is completely tied to the EU. So I think, this is just another example of what a fantasy this UK going it alone really was. And now, of course, Starmer is going to China and is trying to create, more, better relationships. I think there could be something important coming out of it around financial services. It's been really, really hard for other countries to negotiate with China and get something meaningful out of it. I think the Australians, they got some lobster exports, and the Germans didn't get very much at all when they tried. In France, they tried and they got a panda and, I don't know, some pigs they could export, but they didn't get some of the aircraft sales they wanted. But China genuinely, I think, would like to work with the UK for the London financial services market, because they're trying to get the Chinese currency to become a more important currency internationally. And London is an important center for global effects.
Ooh,
So there is potentially some leverage there.
will the renminbi become the new reserve currency? Ooh. I'll take that as a no. And hasn't the UK government just agreed to the mega Chinese embassy in London? I think they're.
Has indeed.
I'm sure there'll be some kissings in the ear. Andrew, one of yours next. We're looking at defense spending in Europe. Europe is tooling up. Maybe NATO isn't dead. Maybe we can go alone without the Yanks. Where did you want to take this one, Andrew?
Well, I think from a startup technology point of view, this trend isn't going away. And I think that's interesting when we look at what we want to invest in, because the military and the defense industry touches every part of technology. And that's good news for the tech ecosystem. I mean, there are some big headline numbers here around, the German industrial will be producing more artillery shells than the whole of the US combined. That's probably a good thing if we do end up in a hot war. But fundamentally, we're going to have to keep at it for a while and be persistent in our policies and government spending if we want to catch up and be compelling as a war-fighting continent, just because we're still so far behind the US on independent capability. If you look purely capability-wise at sort of the tip of the spear, figuratively and literally, we know the key areas that we lack: surveillance and reconnaissance and intelligence, and a lot of that's driven by military satellites. The US have nearly 300. We've got a couple of dozen. If you're thinking about projecting power and how to attack maybe things deep inside Russia, we have no strategic bomber force. The Americans have over 150. We can't refuel our aircraft, but we've got about 150 tanker aircraft versus the Americans over 600-700 tanker aircraft. Strategic airlift is a problem. The Americans have hundreds. We've probably got less than 100 that you can actually deploy to lift heavy stuff and take it somewhere, such as your soldiers or tanks. And the same with recon aircraft as well. Sort of if you want to go and see what's happening, or if you want to, electronic jamming and that sort of stuff, the Americans probably, ISR aircraft probably nudging 150, well, probably a quarter of that. So there are lots of areas where companies will be able to make money if the governments decide they want to spend the money. And that includes drones and everything else as well. So yeah, I mean, they have increased the budgets, but that's got to continue. And that will have to continue for years if we're serious about...
sticky, it's committed, it's slow. That's
well, what happens if Trump does not get in? What happens if one of Trump's disciples doesn't get in, and there's suddenly a renaissance of sort of rhetoric and friendliness from the United States in 3 years' time?
We won't believe them, Andrew. The American public. No, Trump is a symptom, not a cause. Well, my take is half the population of the States voted this man in. This could well happen again. I mean, I don't believe that anyone is waiting in his wings with his charisma and his ability to do what he's done. I don't think Vance for sure can do that. But, this is not him. This is a country that has shown their potential true colors. So I think the trust has been broken personally. Whoever comes in, whoever ingratiates what.
I do think you underestimate how. I mean, look, the headline numbers have been put out there, and commitments been made in the future. I mean, don't forget that if you take the case of the UK, like the increase in defense spending as a percentage of GDP has been committed to increase, but increases don't kick in until 2027. There's plenty of scope for politicians to do what they always do, which is fudge things and kick stuff into the long grass, right? And if Trump rattles the saber a bit less, if Ukraine cools down, even though the fundamental issue at the core of what Andrew and all of us have been saying is still going to be there, it will be easier for politicians to kick it into the long grass because, with the aging economies, like problems are going to arise in quite frankly, in balancing the books in all of these economies going forwards now, right? Where you haven't got the economic growth that you need to increase your tax revenue, et cetera, that could, fund all of this stuff. So I do think that is a risk, Dan, even though at the moment, European defense budgets are scheduled to grow 6.8% year on year over the next 10 years. Like that stuff should be there. It's kind of set, but though there's going to be parliament changes, lots of things can change these things, right, over time.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, Lomax, which is, what is the first budget to get cut often in these situations if there isn't a war on and there isn't the threat of an imminent war, and that is the defense spending. So I don't have a huge amount of faith that we're going to be consistent on this stuff. Aging populations, we have supply chain issues, which are going to, where we're at the mercy of tariffs or, prices going up or rare earth metals. One of the advantages the US has is that it's pretty self-sufficient, actually, both in terms of core manufacturing ingredients, but also its own capabilities. And I think Europe is a lot less
One thing I think is good for, part of the US strategy is basically reindustrialization of the military industrial complex, right? And actually, Europe has that as a sort of stated strategy too. And now, I think all core components are cap. There's a cap of 35% of non-European supply chain that can be in critical components within defense, right? So I think that there is an opportunity. Clearly, some of that will be great for the existing incumbents like Rheinmetall, et cetera, but I think it will also be good for startups building in the space.
Mads, who's spending what where?
It's a good question. Is what you're considering with that, is it sort of countries in Europe, or is it US versus Europe?
US, Europe was my thinking.
Yeah, okay. So, but the US is spending about 900 billion a year on their defense, and Europe spends about half right now. And I think that begs the question, what type of defense is it we want and need? I think Mark Rutte, he was out saying 5%, forget 5%. We need 10% to rival and build up capabilities that are comparable to the US. But the question is whether that really is what we need. The US has got truly awesome power projection capabilities. They've got 11 carrier groups. They can maintain 3 full throttled theaters to project power around the planet at the same time, right? So they can run one in the Atlantic, right? One in the Pacific, one in the Middle East simultaneously. Is that really what we need in Europe?
Just about. I think even they would struggle to do that on an active war footing.
At least that's what they are designed to do. That's what they are. That's the stated aim. And we have seen Trump saying that he wants to increase their annual spend to 1.5 trillion, and maybe he feels that's what they need to get there. But that's how they think about defense, is being able to project power in that way. Is that what Europe needs? Probably not. I think if we could just defend ourselves to begin with, as you say, Andrew, have some of the capabilities we need to, for example, defend Ukraine and make sure that we can keep the peace on our borders, that seems like a more important first step. And that probably doesn't need to cost quite as much as 10% of GDP. So I think there's a path to get this done. But Andrew, I, like you, worry, especially if we don't federalize it, because then it's going to be down to individual states.
No, it needs to.
And you always have the, the freeloader symptom, right? I can cut my defense spending because others are going to take care of it.
So, can I give you a little bit of a bull case, which is, we talk about preparing for the modern warfare, right? And there's tons of good examples in the US now where you've got Anduril, Silicon Valley startup that's developing, weapon systems for the modern age, Zeronic in the context of the Navy as examples, right? And we don't really have a little bit of that in Europe. You have, Helsing. But where the real cutting edge, technology is being developed in modern warfare is in Ukraine. As and when there is a resolution there to, TBC what happens, and if there is a kind of more of an assimilation of Ukraine within the EU or within European NATO, whichever kind of how you want to describe it, actually, those guys are at the cutting edge. And if they become kind of part of this more federalized like European system, then suddenly you've kind of, at least for the Europeans who are weighed down by the laggard, primes at the moment, have this kind of more nimble, battle-trained battle-ready skill set at its fingertips. I mean, that's a very rose-tinted view of it, but it's definitely possible.
There's potential. There's opportunity.
Last on my list was I want to do a quick flyby of the social media bans. Obviously, Oz, France, potentially UK banning social media for youngsters. I was reading some of the science on this, and it's not always clear cut. I think the only thing that is scientifically proven and obvious and extremely worrying is the effect it has on young women. And I was reading one scientific study which incredibly scarily proves that young girls reach puberty faster because of social media. And I read this as that, well, hang on a second, what the heck, how does that even correlate? And I'm going to not do it a great service, but it's along the lines of when the body is under stress, our biology, or young girls' biology, is designed to reproduce faster because it's not in an environment of safety. So therefore, it doesn't have the time to grow, mature, learn. It has to have babies sooner. So young girls, because of the cortisol and the fear response and the anxiety inducing social media, are hitting puberty a lot earlier than they were pre-2012, when front-facing cameras hit the iPhone 4S and we were all, rather than sharing stuff and finding our network and our friends on social media, we became presenters and we became the object rather than part of our communities. And that was incredibly distressing to read. However, aside from that, on the social media front, where we're seeing a bunch of the tech giants, even in the US, this isn't a European thing, but even in the US, being taken to court for addiction and for problems caused in society and for young people with social media, the science isn't as clear cut as whether it's correlation or causation as to whether young people are being distressed and there is more depression, anxiety, and stress because of social media. However, we'll see how the court cases pan out. But did anybody want to take this? I didn't want to spend too long on this, but did anyone, maybe Lomax, have you got some notes on this?
There's an interesting rollout here of how this might play out, right? In the context of social media, which is the Europeans, generally the non-Americans, are taking this as a designating this an important public policy matter, and they're coming out with policies and rules around it, right? And France has just, banned social media for under 15s. Australia did it earlier this year. There are certain other countries within Europe who are making steps towards it. So they're actually doing it at the legislative level. America kind of just leave it to the free market effectively. And now we have people, bringing legal cases against Snapchat, TikTok, and either settling out of court, before that happens, or it goes through the courts and, a judge orders, compensation, which we know in the US with punitive damages can be extremely high. So in a way, the Americans are laying, well, people just figure it out horizontally, and the Europeans and the Australians and actually elsewhere in Southeast Asia, places are being much more vertical and prescriptive about it, which you can make an argument for both. But to be honest, I think, given, I know you say the science may be fuzzy, but my personal view is like social media for under 15s is a very dangerous thing, and the government actually should be getting involved.
Yeah. I'm not sure you can ban social media. I think teenagers will find a way.
But that's a separate.
That's the reports in Australia,
but that's a
isn't it?
separate thing, Dan. I'm just talking about that's an enforcement, practical matter. It's more just should we as conceptually be endorsing this as a society? I normally veer towards the more libertarian side of things, but on this, I think something needs to be done.
What's the point of having a law that just feels like, isn't it just more optics signaling? Oh, that's the wrong expression.
Well, because for the reason
virtue signaling through sort of laws that are unenforceable and don't work. I mean, cursory reports from Australia, a lot of kids are still using it and report it being ineffective, or they're using VPNs, or they're putting in a fake age, or I think if you roll out this law and you want it to work and you mean it, then you've got to do it in a way that means it's enforced. I don't know how you do that, but as a second question, otherwise don't bother.
It's a 50 million Aussie dollar fine for the social media company that enables it or allows it. Well, I don't know if that's per case or if that's on a class. I don't know how that's going to be affected, but that's the. Anyway, listen. Anyone, Mads, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yes. So in the United States, they've had a way to protect the platforms. They've had a way to protect their ability to put and publish content under this Section 230, which effectively is the thing that gets them to get out of jail free by saying, look, we don't take editorial responsibility for the content on our platforms. We just provide a platform and people can post stuff and it's sort of their responsibility. And what's interesting around some of these new lawsuits that are being filed is that they're not going to the content. They're going to the design choices made by the platform. And we know what they are. They're about engagement maximization, right? It's about creating a model and a set of algorithms that encourage people to spend as much time on the platform as possible. And that is now what is being litigated. So it's a very interesting legal angle that's being taken. We know that TikTok and Snapchat, they've both been settling out of court before trials begun. So they don't want to get anywhere near a discovery or a process here in court. But we also know that there are some holdouts, and Meta is one of them. So this is potentially sort of tobacco litigation territory we're coming to. It could be tens of billions in damages, and you could have executives understand, design documents exposed. I mean, this could be very, very explosive stuff. So certainly very interesting cases for those businesses. I think especially for Meta. Google, which is also going to be on trial, obviously has a much wider business model, so they'll be less susceptible. But this is 98% of Meta's revenue here that is being charged.
Okay.
Now, compare and contrast that to what's happening in the EU and in Europe, where the EU slapped a fine on X because of the bad stuff that has been happening, especially around Grok and some of the very inappropriate images that have been created there. Mosky sort of did take a view that, we'll comply, but he also complained and said, we should disband the EU and they're bad people. But it's interesting, right? In the US, you have the courts and litigation, and in Europe, it's been regulatory agencies that have been trying to step up here.
I also saw this week, very, very quickly, that the UK government has pledged to train 10 million UK residents how to use AI. And I thought this was kind of cool. So the domain is aiskillshub.org.uk. It wasn't for discussion unless anybody has any points to raise, but I thought this was quite a speedy response and very ambitious, and I don't know how effective it's going to be. I don't know what the uptake will be. I've not seen in any of the main news feeds, but I thought it was kind of cool. They want to get 10 million people retrained on AI. I don't know if anyone, before we move on to deal of the week, anyone got anything to say on this?
No, I think directionally it's right. I don't know if you saw today, it was also discussed that there should be new welfare programs for sectors and people affected by AI, and kind of you're talking about kind of universal income. And yeah, I think it's troubling that in a situation where we have more young people on welfare and kind of transfer payments than ever before, right? That we see further welfare programs as the solution here. So yeah, I think definitely training, providing skills, giving people the tools and instruments to help themselves become proficient with the new tools seems like a much better strategy than just trying to force more people or put more people on passive income.
I thought it was kind of cool. I'm gonna keep an eye on and see what the uptake is. Right, Lomax, deal of the week. Sword, over to you.
Sword Health out of Portugal has acquired Kaya for 285 million. So Sword Health, digital health company, now valued at 4 billion, has acquired one of its counterparts. Originally, there were three kind of companies vying for supremacy in this market, which is digital health for physio, effectively, physiotherapy. And there was a Hinge Health, Sword Health, and Kaya out of Germany. Hinge Health has gone on to IPO last year, as you might remember. Sword Health is on its tail. I think a couple of 100 million of revenue now. Kaya clearly hasn't necessarily quite worked out and has been acquired for 285 million. Kaya raised 125 million. And it's a great coup for Sword Health, which is becoming a bit of a consolidator now in that market because it gives access to the German market. 70 million people covered by the German national health system. and it's regulated as a kind of under the Germany's what they call DiGA, which is the Digital Health Reimbursement Pathway. So that's an exciting exit/consolidation within the digital health market.
Very nice. Congrats, Sword. Mine was saw NVIDIA and Alphabet backing Synthesia at their 4 billion val, which I thought was kind of cool. Andrew, have you got a deal of the week?
Well, actually, you stole my thunder. And Synthesia, it's fantastic for Victor and the team, and yeah, just very painful because we passed on it back in 2019.
No, passed on Elvis. Mads, did you have a deal of the week? Nothing for you, Squire. Well, then we are done, my fine humans. I will see you next week. Thank you so much for your brains and your insights. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Loved it all.
Outside.